It's just so you know, I'm in the middle of going through eye surgeries and procedures, and I'm not wearing glasses, not because I don't need glasses, but because none of the glasses actually work. So in order to see this, I can't wear glasses. So, again, you have to do things verbally, because if you're just nodding, I got nothing. So, all right. So we're continuing our series we started last week on mental health called Take a Breath. And last week we previewed. This is a two-part. We start out with a two-part message. And I want to go ahead and give you a real quick reminder of what we talked about last week in case you weren't here, or more likely you just forgot. And then we can dig into what is really the meat of the message this week. And last week we started out with a stool, a wonderful, beautiful stool, and I call it the peace stool. And the concept is this: we're all shooting for peace. Peace is emotional and mental health. It's a calmness, and we all want that. And the world challenges us, our brains challenge us, and so we're all shooting for peace, and it starts out with a platform of emotional and spiritual health, and we'll talk about that today. But to get to emotional and spiritual health, there are three legs on the stool that you have to have working. One is friends. You need to be in community with some other people. The other is you need counsel. You need some people who speak wisdom in your life, because if you're like all of us, you can be an idiot sometimes. Right? And you need people in your life who can say, you're being an idiot, okay? That's really important to success. And we have physical needs. If you are physically sick, it's really hard to be emotionally healthy. And so you have to make sure your physical stuff is taken care of. And one of the things we talked about last week specifically with physical is there are physical things you can, like sometimes you can take a medication or something to help you out. But it's really, really important, whatever you're doing in the physical or with the friends and the community and the counsel, is those never replace emotional, spiritual health. They just provide you a foundation for it. Like if you're alone and totally lonely all the time with no friends, no community, it's hard to be emotionally healthy, okay? But, you ready for bad news? Emotional and spiritual health doesn't just pop up because you took care of these things. How do I say this politely? I'm not going to. You're screwed up. You are massively screwed up as a person. I know this because I are a person, and most of my best friends are persons. And we're all screwed up. My other best friend's a dog named Murray, and he screwed up too yesterday. Friday he ate a pair of my underwear. So screwed up is it's the flavor. It's what we come in on earth, okay? So how do we get to emotional and spiritual health? Coming off of a dog eating underwear. Okay, that's the image you need in your mind. They were clean. He got them out of the they were folded and ready to put in the drawer. Stupid dog. Okay, that's enough. Let's move on. So, like I mentioned last week, Philippians chapter 4, Paul wrote a letter to the church at Philippi, and in the 4th chapter of that letter, he details, this is how you get spiritual and emotional health. He just lays it out. It's not easy, but he lays it out. And so we're going to work through that. We're just going to walk our way through that passage and take our time with it. And here we go. We're going to start in Philippians chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Training your brain. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And let's start out with that. There's that word that we're looking for. Okay? The God of peace will be with you. That's what we're shooting for, right? We're shooting for peace. Peace is that peace is the ultimate win for spiritual and emotional health is peace. We know a verse earlier. We just read, verse 7. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Okay? But I need to show you one word that was in both of them. Not a complicated word, but one simple word. Well, pick one. And. Both of those phrases started with the word and, which means the conversation doesn't start here with the peace of God. It starts with what comes before it. Okay? There are in the Bible frequently, you've heard of the promises of God. God makes a promise. And sometimes God makes unconditional promises, but a lot of the time God makes conditional promises. If you do this, then this happens. And in these cases is a signal. Here's all the stuff you need to do, and when you do that, peace is what happens. Now, we have this really bad habit of thinking peace is like this fairy dust thing God sprinkles on us when we're spiritual enough. Right? If you're spiritual enough and you're doing all that stuff right, God's just going to sprinkle peace all over you. Just, Lord, give me peace. You ever heard this? You've heard this. If you've been a Christian very long, you ever heard somebody say, don't pray for patience? Because if you pray for patience, God will send you things to be patient about. Okay? The same thing's true about peace. If you pray for peace, God's going to tell you, here are the things you need to do to get peace. I'm not just going to say, I know so many people, they just have this thing. They want to just, it's like getting a suntan. I just want to be in God's presence until I have peace. That's not what he says we need to do. That's not the direction he gives us. Well, let's look at it and see how he says to do this. Matter of fact, in Romans, Paul also said, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And you'll notice, just before we saw those things, this is a command, isn't it? This is God saying, do this. Matter of fact, there's two commands in this one verse that make a peace sandwich. Look at this. Do not conform to the pattern of the world. That's your first command. Second command, renew your minds. Don't conform to the pattern of the world, but renew your mind. And what happens if you do not conform to the pattern of the world, but renew your mind? What happens is you are transformed. Oh. See, renewing your mind is an active thing. It's something you have to do. Going for the peace and the emotional, spiritual health is something that you do. It's a discipline you maintain in your life, okay? Renewing your mind is active, and what happens is we obey and God transforms, okay? When we obey, God transforms. He's not going to do the transforming. He's not giving us peace. He's not renewing our minds unless we obey what he tells us to do. I know you don't like that. You really don't you just hate that kind of faith, religion stuff? Because we're supposed to be coming to religion so that God will just pour stuff on us. God pours one thing on you, salvation. In the book of Titus, it says that the grace of God gets poured out on us abundantly in salvation. God's grace just pours on us abundantly in salvation. Pretty much everything else, he's like, I need you to do this so this will happen. If you're just waiting around going, God bless me, you're going to wait a while. Because there's almost always, if you do this, if you obey me, then the transformation occurs. Okay? We obey, God transforms. As a matter of fact, it goes back to what Paul talks about when he writes the letter to the Ephesians. It shows up in a lot of his letters, but this is crucial stuff. I call it the Ephesian method, and so does almost everybody else. You identify something that's wrong in your life. You stop it. Then you replace it with something good, and then God transforms you. We saw when we went through the thing. We'll look at it again in just a minute. But it was, here are your negative thoughts. Get rid of those. Here are some positive thoughts. Implement those. And then you'll get transformation. So, if you want to have peace, it starts with identifying and challenging your negative thoughts. Okay? You need to identify and challenge those negative thoughts. You need to speak truth to yourself. Psalm 139 is a great psalm. Psalm 139 is a great psalm. We'll use it in a couple places today. But this one verse is one, or two verses, is one I pray. I pray this verse. I do a lot of praying of Scripture back to God. I find that's very helpful to say, God, I know this is your will, so I'm praying it. And one of the ones I pray is Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. Search me, God, know my heart. Test me, know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Search me, know my heart. Test me, know my anxious thoughts. Now, what did Paul, this is a complicated one. A little bit ago, Paul said, what about anxiety? Be anxious for nothing. Don't ever be anxious. Here he says, know my anxious thought. God, look inside of me and find the negative, anxious thoughts that are in me. Does that make sense? Okay? And then lead me to something better. So identify your negative thoughts. Now let's go keep looking back to the verses we started in. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. 2 commands he gave them, right? The ifs. Rejoice in the Lord always. Say it again. Rejoice. Now, why do you give somebody a command? Because they're not doing what you want them to do. Right? If somebody's already doing it, you don't command them to do it. We said this before. If you're a parent and your kid is in the room cleaning their room by some miracle of God, if the grace is just pouring and your child is in the room cleaning it on their own, you don't bust in the door and say, clean your room. You only say clean your room when their room is a mess and they're in the living room watching TV, right? That's how that works. So Paul, in the book of Philippians, it's known as the letter of joy because Paul's always talking about rejoicing. But that means not that the Philippians were a joyful people, but the opposite. It means they were a grumbling bunch because they weren't rejoicing. If they'd been rejoicing, he'd have sent them a different letter. But they were always complaining, so he says, rejoice. I'll say it again, rejoice. And then at the end of it, it said, don't be anxious. Why do you tell somebody not to be anxious? Because they're anxious. Now, one thing you may have noticed that was kind of odd in there, in the very middle of it, it said, let your gentleness be evident to all. That's odd, isn't it? Rejoice in the Lord, be gentle, don't be anxious. What's gentle got to do with any of that? Have you ever tried to be gentle when you're anxious? If you're anxious, gentle is like the hardest thing in the world to do. When you're anxious, your every muscle's tensed and everything is puckered. And trying to be gentle in that moment is just impossible. So it's like a tell. If you can be gentle, you're moving in the right direction toward no anxiety and joy, rejoicing. But if you can't do gentleness, you're failing the anxiety test. That's one way to tell you're failing the anxiety test is if you can't be gentle. That's the tell, okay? So let's look at it a little more. Let's just keep looking. We're just going to keep reading, okay? Hope you don't mind, okay? Don't be anxious about anything, but why not? Be in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Now, so in other words, don't be anxious, pray. What's going on? Well, the next line tells me. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true. Here's where your anxiety comes from. Your anxiety comes from telling yourself lies. Anxiety, especially for a Christian, is always about lies. Sometimes the lies are about yourself. Sometimes you're telling yourself lies about God. And sometimes you're telling yourself lies about creation and everything around you. But anxiety always comes from lies. Okay? Because what's happening here, when I say I'm anxious, he says be anxious, don't be anxious, but do what? Pray. What should happen after I pray? I should stop being anxious. Why? Because I'm trusting God. All right? So what's happening when I'm anxious, even after I pray? I'm telling myself lies about God. I'm saying that God will not take care of me, that God cannot take care of me, or God doesn't love me enough to take care of me. When I'm anxious after I've prayed, if I'm still anxious, that means I either believe that God can't hear me, won't answer my prayer, or can't answer my prayer, which are all lies about God, right? But what's it mean if I say that God's not faithful? What's it mean if I say God can't hear me? What's it mean if I say that God doesn't love me? See, not just is it's untrue, but when I disagree with God, because God says he's all these things, and when I disagree with God about who he is, I'm calling God a liar. Because God says I am faithful. God says I hear when you pray. God says I love you. And if I'm telling myself any of those things are untrue, I'm not just wrong, I'm calling God a liar. Now, what's the other thing we said? We said that sometimes when you're telling yourself not true, you're saying things that aren't true about God. We also spend an awful lot of time saying things about ourselves that are untrue. You tell more lies to yourself about yourself than any other lie that you tell. I don't care if you're a perpetual liar, if you lie for a living, if that's what you do as a career somehow. Don't be naming careers. I know you guys got some channeling through your minds. We're not going to go there. But if in your brain you're thinking of somebody who lies for a living, that person still lies to themselves more than they lie to you. Because we lie to ourselves constantly. Do you have an inner monologue? You have this thing that you're talking to yourself all the time. And is it positive? It's almost always negative for everybody I know. Here's how bad it is. One of the things I used to like to call myself is idiot. You know, you mess up and go, idiot. You ever do that? You don't. I know you guys don't do that, but I would do that. And I'd mess up and I go, idiot. I mean, little thing, drop something, do something in the wrong order, boot my computer the wrong, whatever, idiot. And I'm like, that's not true. It is verifiably not true, but I still can't fully stop it. So I just call myself silly now. I just compromised because I can't turn it off. I just can't make it go away. So I go, silly, you silly guy, you silly, because that's not as mean as idiot. But what does God say about me? What does God say about you? I told you Psalm 139. We're going right back to Psalm 139. It says, you, God, created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. I know that full well means it is true. Okay? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And when you say that that is not true, what are you doing? Okay? I am not just disagreeing with God about who he is, I'm disagreeing with God about who I am, which means I'm calling God a liar, and I'm lying to myself. Let that sink for just a second. When you call yourself that name that you call yourself when you mess up, you are calling God and yourself a liar. You are wrong and you are lying because it's not true. Does that make sense? Identify those negatives, okay? So that's the first step. Identify the stuff that are the negative thoughts that are coming through your mind. Just point them out. God, show me the anxious thoughts. God, show me the negative thoughts. And that includes, by the way, just negative about creation. The world's just bad. The world's just terrible. God finished creating the world and said, do you remember this? When God finished creating the world, what did he say? It is not good, very good. And I know there was a fallenness and all the other stuff after, but God still considers the world very good. I know that because he plans to restore the whole thing. So the universe is still very good. There are scars and there are bad places and there are bad people like us. But it's still, and if you are going with this negative, constant negative thought about negative things all the time, because let me see if I got this right. Because I read this book called the Bible. You guys read that book? It's really kind of good. And in the end, it says God's going to come back and restore and fix everything. Do you remember that part? Do you remember that? Did you read the book? Do you remember that part of the book? I love the end of the book because, I read the back of the book and we win. And God's got all this stuff mapped out and it's all under control. And when we start going in a real negative direction with our thoughts in general, we are saying that the universe is going downhill, but the universe is going to be redeemed and restored. The ending is a happy one. I mean, some of you like downer movies. Some of us like them to have happy endings. You like happy endings, right? Don't you hate it when there's a series on Netflix or TV, whatever, and you've invested in it, and they come to the end, and you love all the characters, and they have a bad ending for the characters? Don't you hate that? It's like when I watch the last episode of any show, I want everybody to get a happy ending. I don't care. I wanted Breaking Bad to end happy. There was no way it was going to happen, but I still wanted it to happen. Okay? All right, that's what I wanted, because I like happy endings. And when you get really super pessimistic about everything moving forward into the future, you're denying that. That's an untrue thing. God is going to work it all out for your good, for His glory, and for the good of His universe. Romans 8 says the whole creation is crying out in eager expectation of the end times. The universe somehow is anxious for God to fix everything because it's going to have a happy ending. So Paul says that, he says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So we identify our negative thoughts, and then we replace our negative thoughts with positive thoughts. Take off the negative, put on the positive. Take off the negative. You've got these negative thoughts. Now here's the problem. If you say, I'm just not going to think negative thoughts, how does that work out? Okay, I want you to not think about green zebras. For the next 10 seconds, just don't think about green zebras. You can think about anything in the world except green zebras. Right? You had never in your life thought about green zebras until right then when I told you not to. Okay? You can't take something out of your brain without putting something else in its place. That's why Paul has the whole thing. You identify the negative, you take it out, and then you replace it. And so Paul's like, identify these negative thoughts that are coursing through your mind, the lies you're telling about God, the lies you're telling about yourself, the lies you're telling about the universe. Identify them, eradicate them, and replace them with positive thoughts. Like I said, if you're talking about those lies you tell about yourself, look at that verse again. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Period. You don't believe it, but it's true. There's a culture out there intent on convincing you that it's not true. Marketing's purpose is to convince you you're not fearfully and wonderfully made, and that if you could just lose 10 pounds, gain 10 pounds, move 10 pounds somewhere else, you would then be fearfully and wonderfully made. But the reality is God looks at you right now and goes, that's my kid, I like my kid. Okay? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works, God's works in me are wonderful, and I know that full well. It is true. So you're going along, you do something wrong or whatever, and whatever triggers it, the negative thought pops in. You don't just say, don't think that. Replace it with something positive. See, what I need to do, I quit calling myself an idiot. Now I call myself silly. I need to replace that with genius. Right? Make me say, genius. Wow. Watch how I'll work my way out of this one. Right? Seriously, if you have a thing where you look at yourself and call yourself ugly, you take that out and you quit saying that about yourself and you replace it with the word beautiful. Fearfully, wonderfully made. You look at yourself and call yourself loser. You take that out and you put in the word winner. Because God is working everything out to your good and His glory in your life. So you are a winner. I mean, I read the back of the book, and it's not just that we win. I win. I win. I'm a winner. Whatever that negative thought is that keeps popping into your head, Paul says, God says, identify it, get it out, and replace it with something positive about yourself. Now, the anxiety one, where you're feeling anxious. And you're like, oh, I don't know. I noticed something really cool. I was reading in Luke chapter 9, which is the feeding of the 5,000. A lot of you know that story. Because, let me set this down for a second. Feeding the 5,000, Jesus is teaching. There are at least 5,000 men listening, which means it's a crowd. And at the end of the day, a lot of you know this story, I know, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. End of the day, Jesus looks out and says, I think they're hungry. He could hear the stomachs are grumbling. And you just hear you get 5, 10, 15,000 people, and all their stomachs are grumbling. You can hear that. It's an impressive sound echoing off the hills and everything. And Jesus says, we should feed them. And the disciples say, we don't have anything to feed them with. We don't have enough money to buy food. Even if somebody did a DoorDash right now, we can't pay the guy when he gets here. And Jesus says, you feed him. And they go, we can't feed him. We don't have anything. What do you have? And they go, well, some kid brought a Lunchable. It's got 5 little pieces of bread and a couple fish, but I don't think one Lunchable is going to do the job here. And Jesus says, let's give it a shot. And he has, they bring him the food, and he has everybody sit down in groups. And it says Jesus starts breaking the bread and the fish and starts passing it out. Now, I want you to picture that you're there. I want you to pretend you're there. But you got there late. So you're not up front. You can't really make out Jesus very well. You're way, way, way in the back, which is a negative and a positive. It's a negative because you hear the word Jesus. Hey, they're bringing out food. They're feeding everybody. You hear there's food coming. You're in the back. What are you thinking? Hope there's enough. Hope it gets to me way in the back here. Now, the positive is you're closer to McDonald's than anybody else because you're in the back. Right? You can get back to town and get food sooner than anybody else can. And so you have to decide, am I going to be anxious and cut and run? Or going to be patient and wait and let God work? And in Luke's version of the story, he uses one word, and the one translation does its best to capture the essence of that word, and I just love it. It says that Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. And then it says, then breaking them into pieces, I got to circle this. I got to circle right here. He kept giving the bread and the fish to the disciples so they could distribute it to the people. And you're in the back, and your marker rolls off on the ground. And Jesus is breaking, and it goes, you're here. And Jesus is giving, and the bread and the fish are here. Then the bread and the fish are here. Then the bread and the fish are here. And the bread and the fish are here. And you're in the back and you're anxious. But Jesus just keeps on breaking. Jesus just keeps on breaking. Jesus keeps on giving until it gets to you. And just to be sure that it got to you, he broke off some extra. They took off like 12 baskets extra. Do you know why there were 12 baskets? We always come up with all these reasons why he had to make sure it got to you. He had to make sure it filled the crowd. He's just going to keep breaking it until the crowd's got stuff. And by the time the crowd's got stuff, there's already too much in circulation. But he's not going to quit giving until it gets to you. So when you're anxious, remind yourself, I don't know when it's going to get here, but it's coming because he's just going to keep giving. He just keeps breaking it off. He just keeps giving. That's what he does. He just keeps giving until we get that. So when I say be anxious for nothing, when Paul says be anxious for nothing, it's based on a truth about God that Jesus just keeps on giving until it gets to you. And your job is to patiently wait for the God who is truth. The God who is true, who promises to take care of you. And it doesn't just apply to food, it applies to whatever needs you have in your life. Jesus just keeps giving. And it doesn't get there when you want it sometimes, and it doesn't get there when you even think you need it. You have a deadline. He just keeps on giving. So, what's true about you? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. What's true about God? He just keeps giving. And what's true about all creation? Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Look at those words. True, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. You can get blocked from Twitter for using those words. Our world's full of negative. Negative just keeps coming at us. It just flows at us. Here are the words that our world likes: false, dishonorable, repugnant, shameful, impure. Those are the words that are coming at you all the time. Things that are false, things that are dishonorable, repugnant, shameful, impure. You can come up with more of them. And what are we supposed to do when those words come into our heads? We call them out. Something false comes into my brain. My job is to say, that's not true. I'm calling that out. I'm moving it out. I'm replacing it with something that is true. Okay? False, dishonorable, repugnant, shameful, impure, replace them. And what I need to do, the next piece I said to replace your thoughts. The problem is this: if it stays in your brain, it doesn't stay stable. You have to replace your negative thoughts. You've already filled in these blanks. Relax. Replace your negative thoughts with positive thoughts and actions. Remember it said earlier, be gentle. Go out and do things that see that it's working. Paul said in the next verse in that, whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. Start doing it. Don't just think it, do it. Live the positive. Okay? You know what that means, right? If you're thinking negative, your actions are negative. But if you're thinking positive, your actions become positive. If you're panicky, your actions are panicky. If you're worried about money, you get all tight. You ever lose sleep over something? Yeah, me neither. Not since last night. Right? But you live it. You live as if. You live in a positive universe where everything's going to work out. It is going to work out. God's going to work it out in your life. God's going to work it out in the universe. You should live that way. Steve, I'm a pessimist. Well, it's okay to anticipate the negative. Negatives happen. You live in a fallen universe, bad things happen. It's okay to anticipate the negative. That's one thing. It's another thing to live the negative. It's another thing to let the negative control your life. And what God is calling you to is to live the positive. Sure, something could go wrong. Here's how we can fix it. Something could go wrong. Here's how I think God can handle it. I'm going to trust God. Okay? Matter of fact, here's how James puts it. The wisdom that comes from above is first of all pure. Here's another set of those words. But here's the interesting thing. It's pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. Notice this is kind of interesting. There are things that are attitudes, pure, and there are things that are active, gentle, willing to yield. He kind of intermixes the actions and the attitudes. It is full of mercy and good deeds, shows no favoritism, always sincere. Still, you're mixing. Sincere, attitude. Shows no favoritism, action. Full of mercy, attitude. Good deeds, action. You have to start living what you're believing, or it doesn't get off the ground. You won't fully internalize it until you live it. So, because I've tried the positive mental attitude stuff. I'm not saying positive mental attitude. I'm saying trusting God, faith in God, and living like I have faith in God. Living like God's got it. Does that make sense? You got to say something out loud because I can't see you. Okay? You have to live it. And here's the wild part of it. James said all that stuff there. Wisdom that comes from above is first of all pure. It is peace-loving, gentle at times, willing to yield to others, full of mercy and good deeds, shows no favoritism, always sincere. The next verse, and those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. Those who are living it, peacemakers, plant seeds of peace. What happens? Reap a harvest of righteousness. What is that? Transformation. Harvest of righteousness. That's transformation in life. That's you being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. That's God making you the person He created you to be. That's where it stops being here. See, as we do this, this is how this works. As you identify it, eliminate it, and replace it, over time, God starts transforming you to where you don't have to do it anymore. Now, not everything. There are some things He keeps you in so you can keep depending on Him. But if you've been a Christian very long, there will be things that used to be a problem for you. But you just kept identifying it, eliminating it, and replacing it. And suddenly, you don't have to identify it anymore because that part of your life, God fixed it. It's a wonderful thing. It doesn't happen as often as I would like. That's how it works. Because that harvest of righteousness is transformation. Now, let's just go through here's the math for you. Positive thoughts plus positive actions produce peace. Positive thoughts plus positive actions produce peace. That's the math formula. Now, let's read just a little bit more, okay? He said, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. Put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Live it, transformation. A couple verses earlier, the peace of God, we're talking about if you pray, if you give everything to God, you're praying to God, he says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Now, we've read the first 9 verses of the chapter. Most of the first 9 verses. Let's keep reading. Because Paul has just instructed them how to have peace. And your question is, does it really work? I mean, sure, I know. Identify it, eliminate it, replace it. Got it. Does it work? Here's what Paul says. This is the very next verse. I'm just reading straight through this chapter. Don't notice, we started in like verse 3, and we're just reading straight through. We're not stopping, we're not going other places, we're reading straight through this chapter. The very next thing he says after that thing about the peace of God which passes understanding, he said, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. In other words, Paul came to the church in Philippi, he helped the church in Philippi, got him started. They found out he's in trouble, and they start wanting to help. They want to send him money and stuff, okay? But you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need. Here it is. For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. What's another word for content? Anybody know a synonym for content? Peace. I have learned to have peace, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content, having peace in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Now, you've heard that verse before, haven't you? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. But what do you always play to? It's always some football play and say, I knew I could score that touchdown because I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Not exactly. Did you know what that verse is? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. All things I can do is have peace in any circumstance. That's the promise. The promise is not you can lift a 2-ton boulder off your car because you're in trouble. The promise is I can have peace in any situation. Why? What did Paul say? I have learned the secret. Notice that? Let me show you that again. I have learned. Not God. It wasn't peace dust getting sprinkled on me. I have learned. To be content. I have learned to have peace, whatever the circumstances. So therefore I can do all these things through him who gives me strength. Because I have learned to identify the negative thoughts, eliminate the negative thoughts, and replace the negative thoughts. Now, let me just say this, because we're in spring in North Carolina, and I don't know if you know this, North Carolina may be the greatest state in the union when it comes to weeds. I mean, the state plant should be the weed, because your weeds are going to grow out of everything. If you got a house, you got a weed coming. You're like, what? How? You can plant flowers, and the weeds are like, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. you're full of weeds. You're a fallen creature. You're a screwed up creature. You're not going to get to do this once and be done with it. Okay? You're not going to go through the process once and eliminate the negative thoughts and identify the negative thoughts one time, eliminate them, replace them, and I am done. No, I'm going to call myself silly tomorrow. Silly. I'm going to go through I'm going to tend toward anxiety tomorrow. I'm going to tend toward negativity tomorrow. And I have to just keep going at it. Just like the weeds keep coming, I'm a fallen creature and living in a fallen universe with a bunch of screwed up people. And the weeds keep coming, they keep popping up. But I know I have learned, Paul said. I have learned. How did he learn how to be content with plenty? God gave him plenty. He had to learn how to be content in that situation. How did he learn how to be content when he was in need? God let him be in need. God let him be wanting and learn how not to be anxious when things weren't going his way. The way he learned all things was of being in all the situations and learning how to do it there. And then when he got it down, he got to go to another place and try it again. Hey, I got this having all the stuff down. Thanks, God. Okay, let's go with nothing now. But you're going to have to fight it. You're going to have to keep going. It's not going to go away. Never completely. But you can keep training yourself. You can keep transforming yourself. You can keep working. When you identify it, eliminate it, and replace it. Over and over and over again. Spot the lies in your life. Call them out. Call them lies. When something comes into your brain and it's a negative and you know it's a negative, and it's a lie about God's nature, call it out. Identify it. When you say something in your brain, then you know it's a lie about yourself, call it out. Identify it. Eliminate it. Replace it. That's how you get to emotional peace. By doing that work over and over and over again, you can reach the point, I have learned to be content. I can do it all through the one who strengthens me. That's our challenge when it comes to mental health. That's the first major piece of the mental health issue, is learning the discipline to identify it, eliminate it, and replace it. Okay? Now, during the next song, we always want the song that comes after the sermon to be a response time for you. It's not, we're not killing time with some music until they get the kids ready for you. It's not the point. I want you to make a decision. I want you to move. And it could be we talk about blue bags and maybe time to accept Jesus Christ. But today I want to stress to you the reason we have a cross and we have communion. There's a communion station there and a communion station there and a cross in the corner. The reason those are there is to give you a physical response. Remember I said you have to live it. Physical action has power. So if you say, I'm going to start doing this, and then you take that pledge and you go take communion, and as the way you're praying, God, give me the strength to do this, it's a way of action. It's a way of living it. If you want to go to the cross and pray about it, it's an action. It's a way of living it. Putting something physical with a decision is always powerful. Takes a decision to a new level. And if you think God wants you to start doing some of these things, something specifically speaking, and you want to go take communion, you want to pray about it, do that. If not, find some way to express, I'm going to do this because I'm tired of being negative. I'm tired of being anxious. I'm tired of tearing myself down. I'm tired of tearing other people down. Identify it. Eliminate it, replace it. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you want us to have good mental health. You want us to have peace. That is your will for us. Father, I even thank you that you don't just sprinkle it on us. That you give us a process, you give us a plan, you give us a strategy. Help us to live that strategy. Help me to have the courage and the fortitude and the determination to replace the negative words I call myself with positive words. Help me to replace the negative thoughts I have about you, the doubts I have about you, the anxiety I have because I'm not thinking properly about you. Help me to replace that. Help me to replace the negative thoughts that course through my body about everything with things that are true and noble and right and pure. Things that are worthy of praise. Father, help us to do our part, knowing that you promise when we do our part, you will transform our minds. That's in Jesus' name I pray.